It was the morning of my son's wedding, and I stood in my small bedroom, ironing my plain old dress as carefully as if it were silk. I knew his bride's family was rich, and I knew I did not fit their world, but I told myself it did not matter. I was his mother. That should have been enough. I had no idea they had placed me in row 14 by the service door, like a stranger. If you're watching this, please like the video, subscribe, and tell me from where you're watching today in the comments down below. That morning felt peaceful, almost gentle, the kind of morning where a mother tells herself everything will be fine, even when she feels a small ache in her chest. I woke up early, made myself a cup of tea, and laid out the simple dress I had ironed the night before. It wasn't new, it wasn't fancy. It was a plain, soft blue dress I had worn to church many times, but it was clean, pressed, and respectful, and in my heart I believed that was enough for my son's big day. I reminded myself over and over that love mattered more than money, more than clothes, more than where you sat. A mother doesn't go to her son's wedding to impress anyone. She goes because she raised the groom, because she wants to see him happy. I pinned my old brooch to the front of my dress, the one my husband gave me decades ago. For a moment, I felt him with me. I whispered, "He's getting married today," and smiled even though no one else was there to hear it. I didn't have a fancy necklace or expensive shoes. I didn't have a stylist or makeup artist. But I felt proud, not of myself, but of the life I had built and the boy I had raised. I looked at my reflection and told myself, "Your presence is more important than anything else." I packed a small purse with tissues, breath mints, and a handwritten letter I planned to give my son later. Just a simple note telling him how proud I was and how much his father would have loved to see him start this new chapter. I didn't expect a front row seat. I didn't expect attention or applause. I simply hoped for a quiet place to sit and a moment to hug my child before he walked down the aisle. As I stepped outside, I saw the expensive cars driving past toward the wedding venue. Black SUVs, white limousines, guests in gowns and diamonds. I stood at the bus stop in my blue dress and shawl, watching them glide by like a different world entirely. But again, I told myself it didn't matter. A mother belongs wherever her child is. That was enough to keep me smiling. When I reached the venue, I stopped for a moment and took in the sight. It was breathtaking. Golden arches, crystal decorations, white flowers everywhere. The kind of wedding people post all over the internet. Staff in black uniforms rushed around, setting up last-minute details. Guests arrived in sparkles and designer outfits. I felt small, yes, but I also felt proud that my son had reached a place where he could afford something so beautiful. I didn't think about where I would sit or how people would see me. I only thought about seeing him happy. As I walked toward the entrance, I tried not to feel self-conscious about my dress or my shoes. People brushed past me in expensive perfume and silky fabrics. Some glanced at me with polite smiles, the kind you give someone you don't know and don't think about again. I kept my shoulders straight and my smile warm. I told myself, "You're his mother. You belong here." And in that moment, I still believed it. I didn't know, not yet, that the seat reserved for me was the farthest one from the altar. I didn't know the bride had personally made that seating chart. I didn't know she had whispered something cruel about me long before I arrived. I didn't know someone else would sit beside me, someone who would turn the entire wedding on its head. I walked in with hope in my heart, thinking this day would be about love and unity. I had no idea that one simple seating assignment would reveal everything my son and his bride had been hiding from me. The moment I stepped into the wedding hall, the difference between their world and mine hit me like a cold wind. Everything inside sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hanging high above, white marble floors shining like water, gold-trimmed chairs arranged in perfect rows. Guests drifted around in gowns that shimmered under the lights, women wearing jewelry that could buy a house, men in tuxedos tailored to perfection. Everyone looked like they belonged on a magazine cover. I stood there in my simple blue dress, holding my purse close, trying not to feel small. I kept telling myself this was my son's day. Just be proud. Just smile. A woman with a clipboard approached me, her eyes scanning me from head to toe. She didn't hide her judgment. She forced a polite smile and said, "Name?" I gave her my name, the mother of the groom, but her eyebrows twitched slightly, like she didn't believe me. She checked her chart, looked back up, then pointed with her pen toward the far back of the hall. "Row 14, she said, "by the service door." I was confused at first. I thought maybe she was mistaken. Maybe she mixed up the seating chart. So I asked again, "Are you sure?" She nodded quickly, already turning away to greet someone more important. That was my first sign that something was not right. I followed the direction she had pointed, walking past rows of beautifully dressed people, passing table after table filled with the bride's wealthy guests. The farther I walked, the more I felt eyes on me, not mocking, but curious, like they were wondering who let me in. When I reached row 14, my heart sank. It was the row closest to the back wall, right beside the service door, where staff were carrying trays in and out. Every few seconds, the door swung open with a loud thump. I sat down slowly. My chair wobbled a little, unlike the rest. It felt like an afterthought, like someone had added it at the last minute for a person they didn't want seen. I tried to compose myself, but then she appeared, the bride. Fully dressed for the ceremony in a gown worth more than my car, her makeup perfect, her smile fixed just enough to fool everyone except me. She looked like she stepped out of a commercial, shiny hair, diamonds in her ears, long veil trailing behind her. She walked straight toward me, and for a moment, I thought she was coming to hug me or greet me kindly. Instead, she leaned in close so no one else could hear and whispered, "Your seat is back here for a reason. Your poverty will embarrass us. Please stay out of sight." Then she gave a tiny smile, the coldest smile I had ever seen. She turned away without waiting for a response, as if seating me next to a service door like a shameful secret was perfectly normal. My throat tightened. I felt my cheeks burn. I told myself not to react. Not today. Not at his wedding. I looked down the aisle where my son would soon walk. I reminded myself it was his day, not mine. But inside me, something cracked. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was just hurt. I had raised that woman's husband. I had worked 2 jobs when he was little. I had packed his lunches, attended his school plays, walked him to the bus stop on freezing mornings, and spent years alone after his father died, all to give him the best life I could. And now, on the biggest day of his life, his bride believed I didn't deserve to be seen. I sat there quietly, staring at the empty aisle, trying to swallow the shame. For a moment, I even wondered if leaving quietly would be better. Maybe I was an embarrassment to them. Maybe I didn't belong. But then something unexpected happened. A tall man in a sharp black suit approached the back rows. I thought he was a security guard or a staff member, but he looked too polished, too confident. He scanned the seats, then stopped when he saw me. Without hesitation, he walked over and sat down right beside me, adjusting his tie like he belonged there. He leaned slightly toward me and said in a calm, steady voice, "Let's pretend we came together." Before I could ask who he was or why he said that, the music shifted. Guests turned toward the front. My son stepped onto the stage, ready to begin the ceremony. He did a quick glance over the audience, and then he saw us. His eyes locked on the man sitting beside me. His face went white as his shirt, as if a ghost had walked into the room. And in that moment, I understood something very clearly. Whoever this man was, my son knew him very well, and he never expected him to be sitting next to his poor mother in row 14. When the man in the black suit sat beside me, everything around us seemed to slow down. The clinking glasses, the soft chatter, the wedding music, all of it faded a little as he straightened his jacket and crossed his legs like he belonged in the front row, not hidden in the shadows with me. He didn't shrink into the corner like most people would. He didn't act embarrassed to sit beside the poor mother. Instead, he sat tall, confident, almost protective. He leaned just slightly toward me, not too close, and said again, calm, warm, steady, let's pretend we came together. I didn't know him. I had never seen him before, but there was something in his presence that made me feel less like a burden and more like a person again. I opened my mouth to ask who he was, but before I could speak, the wedding coordinator signaled everyone to turn toward the aisle. The ceremony was about to begin. The bride's family sat in the first 2 rows, shimmering in gold and diamonds, smiling proudly like royalty. The groom's friends filled the middle rows. Only row 14 held silence, and 2 people the rest of the hall didn't care to notice. Then my son walked onto the stage. He looked handsome, nervous, excited, like any groom would. He did a quick sweep of the crowd from the front rows to the aisle, probably checking if everyone was in place. But when his eyes drifted to the back, everything changed. He stopped breathing. His smile froze. His jaw tightened. Then his eyes locked on the man sitting beside me. His face turned white, so white that for a moment I thought he might faint. He blinked fast, looked again to make sure he wasn't imagining it, then stared at me. His expression wasn't confusion. It was fear. My heart thudded in my chest. Why was he so shaken? Why did seeing this man beside me hit him so hard? I looked at the man again, trying to figure out what connection he had to my son. He looked like someone important. Polished shoes, expensive suit, calm confidence. Certainly not one of the bride's distant cousins, who all carried themselves like they were above the rest of humanity. No, he wasn't one of them. His presence was different. Quiet power, not loud wealth. My son's hands trembled slightly as he fixed his cufflinks. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. He kept staring at the man beside me, his eyes narrowing in worry or recognition. I couldn't tell which. But the bride didn't see any of this. She entered with her perfect smile, holding her bouquet like a princess stepping into a fairy tale. She didn't notice that her groom was barely holding himself together. As the officiant began speaking, I leaned slightly toward the man and whispered, "Do you know my son?" He didn't look at me at first. He kept watching the ceremony with a neutral expression, then replied quietly, "Yes, better than he realizes." There was no anger in his voice, no pride, just a simple truth stated like a fact. I didn't understand what he meant, not yet. Halfway through the vows, the bride finally followed my son's line of sight and noticed us. First she looked annoyed. Why was he distracted? Then she looked confused. Who was I sitting with? Then her face stiffened. She recognized him too. Not in the way you recognize a celebrity. No, this recognition carried dread, panic. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet. Her smile trembled. Her eyes darted from him to my son, then back again. Something big was hidden here, something neither of them expected to see sitting in row 14. Suddenly, I understood the phrase, "Let's pretend we came together." He didn't want me to feel alone, but there was something else, something deeper. This wasn't kindness from a stranger. It was a message to them. He wanted my son and his bride to see him sitting next to me. He knew exactly what kind of message it would send, and whatever they had built on lies and image began cracking in that moment. The officiant continued speaking, but neither my son nor his bride were listening. They kept glancing back at us. He avoided the man's eyes. She tried to smile, but the corners of her lips twitched. Something between them shifted, something sharp, uncomfortable, dangerous. The man beside me simply folded his hands and watched the ceremony calmly, as though he had all the time in the world and nothing to hide. But my son, he looked like he was standing on a trap door that might open beneath him at any second. I didn't know who this man was yet. I didn't know why his presence scared them. I didn't know what secret he carried. But I did know one thing. Their reaction told me that everything I believed about my poor image, my simple dress, and my low place in this wedding was about to be turned upside down, and row 14, intended to humiliate me, was about to become the most important seat in the entire ceremony. As I sat there with the mysterious man beside me, watching my son and his bride panic at the sight of him, memories I had kept quiet for years rose up inside me. Most people in that room thought I was just an old woman in a simple dress. They thought I lived on a small pension, maybe some leftover savings, nothing more. My daughter-in-law made sure everyone believed it, including her own family. She called me modest, simple, poor but sweet. She thought she was being kind. What she didn't know was that the word poor had never applied to me, not for a very long time. After my husband died, I lived through a very dark season. I was lonely, grieving, and unsure of what my future would look like. My son was in college then. I didn't want to disturb him. I didn't want him to worry about bills or about me struggling. I took a small part-time job at a local library just to keep my days full, but financially, I was fine, very fine, and no one knew. Because years before my husband got sick, we had made an unusual decision. He had encouraged me to invest a small inheritance I received instead of letting it sit in a savings account. We didn't know much about investing back then, but we met a young businessman, quiet, brilliant, honest, who believed in a project that no one else wanted to fund. He asked for help, but he didn't ask for pity. He asked for partnership. My husband trusted him instantly. I trusted my husband, so we took a leap. His name was Daniel. Yes, the same man now sitting beside me in row 14. He didn't look like a millionaire back then. He looked like a hungry dreamer wearing the same suit to every meeting. But he was driven, loyal, respectful. My husband admired him deeply. After my husband passed away, Daniel came to the house, sat at my kitchen table, and promised me one thing: I will never let your investment go to waste. And he kept that promise. We built something, quietly, slowly, far from eyes that would judge or ask or pry. I wasn't a flashy investor. I didn't buy big houses or fancy cars. I didn't even tell my son because he was young, and I didn't want him to depend on money while forgetting values. I didn't want him to think he didn't have to work hard. I wanted him to earn his place in the world, not inherit it while still a boy. What Daniel and I built grew beyond everything I expected. A software company, then a logistics branch, then real estate, then government contracts, all under Daniel's leadership. But my early investment had made me the quiet majority shareholder. I didn't take the money out. I reinvested. I lived simply. I kept to myself, and the world kept assuming I was just a widow with a modest life. Even my own son. Years later, when he married, his bride's family sniffed around for money. They asked subtle questions about my income, my property, my savings. They wanted to know if I was comfortable, but not out of concern. They wanted to know if I could contribute to their future lifestyle. When they learned I lived in an older home and wore inexpensive clothing, they assumed everything about me. They didn't ask deeper. They didn't imagine a life beyond their own assumptions. My son saw me paying bills, shopping with coupons, reusing dresses. He saw me helping where I could, but he never asked how I lived so comfortably on so little. He just accepted the picture his wife painted, that I wasn't wealthy, that I needed help, that I belonged in the background. So I let them believe it, because money changes people, and I wanted to see who they truly were without it. Having Daniel sit beside me at that moment wasn't luck or coincidence. Daniel had been invited by the bride's family, just not to sit with me. They didn't know who he was. They thought he was simply another business guest. But Daniel saw where they seated me. He saw the humiliation. He saw them hide the groom's mother like an embarrassment. And that's when he made the decision to walk all the way to the back and sit beside me like an equal. It was his way of saying, "Stand tall, you are not who they think you are." And when my son's face turned white upon seeing us together, I finally understood why Daniel's presence shook him so badly. He knew exactly who Daniel was. He knew the company. He knew the value. He knew the power. But he never, ever imagined Daniel would sit beside the mother he had pushed into row 14. My son had spent years trying to distance himself from my simple life, trying to blend into his bride's rich world. But at that moment, he realized the truth. The only real power in that room was sitting beside me. And it terrified him. Long before the wedding day, the bride had already shown me who she was. Her comments were small at first, the kind you brush off because you want peace in the family. She would say things like, "Oh, wear something simple, your usual style." Or, "Maybe you shouldn't stand too close in photos, the colors won't match." At the time, I thought she was nervous, trying to make everything look perfect for the big day. But as months went on, her suggestions became rules. Suddenly, I wasn't allowed in planning meetings. My opinions were dismissed with a soft laugh. She sent me the wedding invitations late and told me it was because we didn't think you'd mind. Her words began shaping a message I couldn't ignore. I wasn't part of their picture. The bride liked control. She liked image. She liked the idea of marrying into a wealthy, polished, high-status family. But she didn't like the mother that came with the groom. She looked at my simple clothes, my old handbag, my quiet manner, and she decided I didn't fit her version of success. I could feel her tightening the strings around everything, from the guest list, to the flowers, to the seating chart. Every detail was her kingdom, and she wanted the wedding to reflect her brand, not her marriage. My son changed too. Before marriage, he used to visit me every Sunday. After the engagement, Sundays became family days, which meant only her family. He wouldn't say it directly, but I saw it. She wanted to surround him with her wealthy relatives and wealthy friends, the kind of people who wore matching outfits on holidays and took photos like magazine covers. She wanted him to forget his old life, and that included me. I noticed small things. My son stopped asking if I needed help with groceries. He stopped talking about his father. He stopped showing interest in visiting my house. It was like his entire life before her became a memory he didn't want to acknowledge. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't hateful. He was simply drifting, pulled by her hand toward a world where his mother didn't fit. And she made sure I understood that. 2 weeks before the wedding, she came to see me. She didn't sit down. She didn't greet me warmly. She walked into my home like she was stepping into a thrift store. She looked around with a small frown and said, "Just checking what you plan to wear." I showed her my ironed blue dress. She stared at it for a long moment, then forced a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "It's fine," she said. "Just sit near the back so the photographers don't accidentally catch you in the main shots." That was when my suspicion turned into certainty. She wasn't protecting the wedding. She was protecting her image. In her mind, my presence lowered the value of everything she built. She wanted to hide the part of my son's life that didn't match her luxury lifestyle. She wanted people to believe my son came from money, from class, from her world, not from mine. I tried to bring this up with my son, gently, but he brushed it off. He said she was just stressed. He said weddings were overwhelming. He said I was reading too much into things. But I saw the truth. She didn't want a mother-in-law who baked cookies, ironed simple dresses, and rode the bus. She wanted one that wore pearls, drove a luxury car, and carried a designer bag. And because I wasn't that woman, she pushed me into the shadows. At family dinners, she introduced me last. At their engagement party, she didn't even save me a seat. When their photographer took family pictures, she gently guided me to the side and asked a cousin to stand next to her instead. And once, very quietly, she told my son within my hearing distance, "She doesn't understand our lifestyle. It's best to keep things separate." Separate. That was the word she used. Not respectful, not balanced, separate. She wanted my son all to herself. She wanted his last name, his accomplishments, his salary, and whatever prestige she believed came with marrying him. But she didn't want the truth that he had been raised by a widow who worked hard, lived simply, and had never stepped into a store that sold the gowns she loved. She talked to florists, planners, caterers, and decorators with the tone of someone building a royal event. But when she talked to me, she used a tone meant for someone who should feel grateful for being allowed to attend at all. And each time we got closer to the wedding, her true nature became clearer, not just to me, but even to her own family. They followed her lead, treating me with polite distance, as if I were some old aunt they didn't want near the front. But the most painful moment came when my son repeated her words. He said softly, "Mom, she just wants the wedding to look perfect." Perfect, meaning I was a flaw. I never told him the truth, that he came from a mother who wasn't poor at all, that he came from a woman who built quiet wealth, that the man he feared seeing in row 14 was linked to me, not to his bride. She hid me out of shame. But she forgot something important. When you hide someone because you think they are beneath you, you risk exposing who you truly are. And row 14 wasn't going to stay silent for long. After the ceremony ended, people rushed toward the front rows to congratulate the bride and her family. They didn't look toward row 14, and that was fine with them. They didn't expect anything important to come from the shadows. But as the guests stood and moved toward the reception hall, my son finally found the courage to walk all the way back to me. He didn't smile. He didn't open his arms. His steps were slow, like he was dreading every second of the distance between us. When he reached me, he didn't sit. He didn't offer to help me stand. He just stood there stiffly, like I had become a stranger he didn't know how to speak to. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he asked, "Mom, why is he sitting with you?" He didn't say Daniel's name. He didn't need to. His fear spoke for him. His eyes weren't on me. They were locked on Daniel, who was still sitting calmly, watching the room as if nothing unusual was happening. I looked at my son fully then, and for the first time in my life, I didn't see the little boy I once carried. I saw a grown man who had tried to bury me out of embarrassment. I answered softly, "Why are you ashamed of me?" Those words stunned him more than any explanation could have. He glanced around as if hoping no one nearby had heard. He stepped closer and said under his breath, "Don't make this a scene." He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't worried about my feelings. He was worried about how he looked. That realization stung more than all the whispered insults from the bride, because a mother can bear humiliation from outsiders, but humiliation from her own child, that is a deeper wound. I asked him again, "Why did she put me in row 14? Why didn't you stop her?" He looked down at his shoes like a guilty schoolboy. He said nothing. His silence said everything. He had let her do it. He had agreed, even if quietly. He had allowed his mother to be seated by the service door so the rich guests wouldn't see me. He let them hide me like a stain on a wall. He opened his mouth, trying to explain himself. "Mom, she just wants everything to look perfect. Her family is... well, they're used to a certain image. I didn't want drama today." He said it as if hurting me was the easier option, as if my dignity was a fair price for his perfect wedding photographs. That was his explanation. He added, "I thought you'd understand, like I was supposed to accept disrespect because it came wrapped in silk and flowers." I felt something inside me break, not anger, not hatred, but a deep sadness. I raised him alone. I sacrificed so much so he could study, grow, and build a life he was proud of. I was the one who cooked for him when I was exhausted. I was the one who paid tuition with extra shifts. I was the one who held him when his father died. And now, on the most important day of his life, I wasn't good enough to sit near the front. My son swallowed hard and asked again, "Why is he here?" This time, there was no hiding the fear in his voice. I turned slightly, glancing at Daniel. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't interrupt. He knew this was something I needed to face alone, but his calm presence was enough to shake my son. I said, "He sat with me because no one else cared where I sat." My son's face twisted with confusion, guilt, and something else, worry. He looked at Daniel again with recognition. Real recognition. He knew who he was. He knew what he represented. The bride, who had been posing for pictures up front, suddenly noticed where her groom had gone. When she saw us talking, she rushed over with forced concern, asking, "Everything okay here?" But the moment she noticed Daniel still sitting behind us, her smile strained. My son tried to regain control of his expression, but he couldn't. He asked quietly, "Did you invite him?" He said it like a fear, not a question. Before I could respond, I asked him something else. Something simple, but heavy enough to sink into the floor. Did you ever think about how your choices make me feel? He looked away again, and in that moment, I saw the guilt wash over him, not because he loved me, but because he realized he had made a terrible mistake, a mistake that would not stay hidden in row 14 much longer. He finally whispered, "Mom, please don't do anything embarrassing." I looked at him, my own son, worried more about embarrassment than about dignity. And I knew then, he wasn't ashamed because I was poor. He was ashamed because he didn't know who his mother really was. And now the truth was sitting right beside me, in a black suit, and that truth was about to change everything. My son stood there trembling. The bride hovered behind him, pretending everything was fine, and Daniel sat calmly in row 14, like a quiet storm waiting to break open. But long before this wedding day, long before the chandeliers and the golden decor, long before the bride whispered that my poverty would shame them, I already knew something was wrong in their marriage. And I wasn't talking about love. I was talking about intentions, motives, the kind of quiet greed that grows when someone looks at your child not as a partner, but as a stepping stone to a lifestyle they could never build alone. It started months before the wedding. The bride began asking questions she had no right to ask. She cornered me in the kitchen once and said, "Do you have any jewelry from your husband? Any assets? Land?" Her tone wasn't casual. It was calculated. When I said I kept my life simple, she gave a disappointed sigh, like I had ruined her plans. Soon after, my son started getting strange calls from her family. They asked about inheritance, retirement accounts, even medical insurance. At first, I brushed it off as nosiness, but the pattern grew clearer with every visit. One day, I overheard the bride talking to her sister. They didn't know I was in the hallway. The bride whispered, "If his mother had money, she'd be wearing better clothes. Trust me, she's got nothing. Our future depends on you marrying rich too." And her sister replied, "Good, then focus on his career. Your mother-in-law is irrelevant." That word hit me, irrelevant. They reduced me to a background object. But the moment that changed everything happened 3 weeks before the wedding. Daniel called me, not socially, not casually. His voice was tight, serious. "I need to speak with you," he said. I assumed he wanted to update me on a business matter, but when he came over, he placed a stack of files on my kitchen table. I had not touched those files yet when he said, I was approached. I looked up, confused. He continued, "By the bride's family. They want access to my company. They think your son will inherit your shares someday." My heart dropped. My son had unknowingly bragged to his fiancée that he had connections, that his family had ties to a big firm, but he had no idea how deep those ties went. He didn't know I was the majority shareholder. He assumed Daniel was a distant acquaintance. The bride's family, clearly desperate for status and money, had tried to dig their way into Daniel's business, believing it would elevate them socially and financially. Daniel looked at me and said, "They think you're poor. They think your son will inherit nothing. They treat you like a burden, but they are trying to access millions behind your back." He slid more papers toward me, screenshots of emails, meeting requests, and sneaky attempts to get information. At the bottom was a note written by the bride's mother. "We need to understand what we gain from this marriage." Gain. That was the word she used. Not love. Not partnership. Gain. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't rant. I did what any mother with dignity and a good memory does. I started gathering evidence. I checked old emails, phone messages, notes, overheard conversations. I spoke to people who had been approached by the bride's family. I visited my bank, reviewed my shares, updated my legal papers, and met with Daniel's legal team, not to attack them, but to protect myself, to make sure that if this marriage was built on lies, at least I would not be the fool they thought I was. The deeper I dug, the more I found. The bride's family wasn't wealthy. They were drowning in debt. credit cards maxed out, loans unpaid, a mortgaged house barely holding on. They needed my son, not as a partner, but as a financial lifeline. They needed his future. They needed my future. And when they learned Daniel existed, they wanted his future. They wanted access to everything. And their strategy was simple: hide the mother, control the son, marry into the company, climb into wealth. The wedding wasn't about love. It was a transaction. And the bride didn't want me in the front row because she didn't want anyone to know the truth, that she wasn't marrying wealth. She was marrying into my wealth. And she had no idea. Daniel looked at me 3 nights before the wedding and said, "Are you ready for this?" I nodded. I wasn't ready emotionally, but I was ready legally. I had everything organized, every file prepared, every document aligned. The bride's family thought they had hidden their intentions well, but they forgot something important. You can only underestimate a mother, because she allows you to. They mistook my silence for weakness. They mistook my modest life for poverty. They mistook my kindness for stupidity. And now, all of their plans were sitting in my folder, waiting for the right moment. That moment arrived at the wedding. The moment Daniel walked to row 14, sat next to me, and turned the entire room upside down with a single quiet gesture. He wasn't sitting with me to comfort me. He was sitting with me to send a warning to them, to my son, to anyone who thought I was invisible. And the bride, who had tried so hard to hide me, was about to learn exactly who she tried to bury. After the ceremony, the guests drifted to the reception hall, an enormous room filled with chandeliers, long tables, and centerpieces that probably cost more than my monthly bills. Laughter echoed everywhere, glasses clinked, and photographers rushed around capturing posed smiles. But there was a tension in the air that only a few people noticed. My son kept glancing toward the back, toward row 14, toward Daniel. The bride looked like she was smiling through a cracked mask. And Daniel? He moved with calm purpose. He didn't rush. He didn't hide. He waited. He waited until enough eyes were on him. Then he approached the main table. The bride, my son, her parents, and a crowd of wealthy guests. I followed slowly, not wanting a scene, but knowing one was coming whether I liked it or not. He reached the table before I did. When he arrived, the bride's parents straightened in their chairs, recognizing him not as the man who sat beside me in the poor row, but as someone of importance. They didn't know who he was exactly, but they could smell power. They stood, smiling like eager hosts, trying to reel in a big fish. My son's hands shook slightly. He didn't know if this was salvation or disaster. Daniel didn't greet anyone personally. He simply said, "Good evening," with the kind of voice that was polite but impossible to ignore. It had weight, authority, command. The music in the background suddenly seemed too loud, too sharp, like the room was waiting for something to snap. Then he turned to the microphone near the stage. "May I have one moment?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. The entire room fell quiet. My son froze. The bride's smile died. The parents looked nervous. I stood near the corner of the room, watching everything unfold with a calmness I didn't expect to feel. After all the humiliation, all the whispered insults, all the ways they tried to bury me behind the service door, this wasn't revenge. This was truth emerging in the one room they least expected it. Daniel tapped the microphone lightly and spoke clearly. "I want to congratulate the bride and groom on their beautiful day, and I want to say something to the mother of the groom, who was seated in the back." The room shifted. People turned. Eyes followed. My simple blue dress suddenly became the brightest thing in the room. Daniel continued, "I've known her for many years. She is the backbone of my company, the one who believed in me when no one else did. Without her, none of my success would have existed." A gasp went through the hall. Some guests whispered, "Who is she?" Others whispered, "Why was she in the back?" The bride's mother nearly dropped her wine glass. My son's face went pale again, this time with shame. Daniel didn't stop. "She is the majority investor in our firm. She owns controlling shares, and I am here today, publicly, because I wanted to honor the woman who changed the course of my life. Silence, thick, heavy, unavoidable. My son looked at me with horror. The bride looked like she had swallowed a stone. Her parents looked like their entire plan had just exploded in front of them. I stepped forward, finally reaching the edge of the main table. My presence alone made my son shrink. He whispered, "Mom, you never told me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The entire room already knew what mattered. Daniel handed me a small box. Not jewelry, not money, but documents, shares, legal proof. Everything her family tried to manipulate behind closed doors now lay right there in the open. The bride's father cleared his throat, suddenly respectful, suddenly polite, suddenly realizing the woman he dismissed was far more powerful than he imagined. He tried to speak, but Daniel lifted a hand gently and said, "Let's give her the floor." My son looked at me with desperate eyes, waiting for me to speak. The bride's smile trembled, trying to salvage the moment. She said, her voice cracking, We didn't know." But that wasn't the truth. She didn't know who I was, yes. But she absolutely knew how she treated me. None of it was accidental. I spoke quietly, but my voice carried through the microphone Daniel offered me. "I wasn't angry that you seated me in the back," I began. "I was hurt that my own son let it happen." The bride's face crumpled. My son lowered his head. Her family stared at the floor. I continued. "You thought my simple dress and quiet life meant I was less. But respect isn't about money. It's about how you treat people." Then I closed the box in front of them. Daniel looked at me with a small nod, letting me know the choice was mine now. And the choice was simple. I wasn't going to be the quiet shadow anymore. Not for them, not for anyone. The truth was already out. And this wedding, built on image, lies, and pride, was about to face the consequences. The room was so quiet, you could hear the hum of the chandelier lights. Every guest looked frozen, holding their breath as if afraid to move. My son stared at the floor like a child caught doing something shameful. The bride clutched her bouquet so tightly that the petals began to crack. Her parents stood stiff, trying to smile, but unable to hide the panic spreading across their faces. They had spent months preparing this perfect image, this flawless wedding, this picture of wealth, and in a few minutes, Daniel's words tore through all of it like a knife. And now, the consequences began to unfold. Daniel stepped aside, letting the silence sit heavy on their shoulders. The bride's father finally spoke, his voice shaking. Mrs. Emily, had we known?" But I raised my hand gently. I didn't want explanations. I didn't need excuses. My son looked up, waiting for me to say something he could cling to, something that would soften what he had allowed. The bride looked at me with a desperate smile, like she thought she could charm her way out of this. She stepped closer and said, "We never meant to disrespect you. It was all a misunderstanding." Her voice trembled in a way that wasn't sorrow. It was fear. Not fear of hurting me. Fear of losing what she wanted. Daniel looked at her calmly and asked, "And what exactly did you misunderstand?" She blinked rapidly, unprepared for direct questioning. She stuttered something about seating arrangements and communication errors, but the guests had already seen how she whispered to me earlier. Her words fell flat, her image shattered. My son tried to step between us, saying, "Mom, please, let's talk about this privately," but I shook my head. "You made your choices in public," I said, "so you'll hear the consequences in public." I placed the box of documents on the table, my shares, my power, everything her family tried to access. Then I said, "I am not here to ruin your wedding. I'm here to correct the lie you built it on." The bride's mother moved forward, forcing a tight smile. "We didn't know you were involved in such large business matters." Her tone slipped with every word. She wasn't apologizing to me. She was apologizing to the money she thought she lost. That was when true character revealed itself. Her daughter, the bride, leaned toward my son, and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Ask her to sign something. We can't lose this opportunity." That one sentence told the whole truth. She didn't love my son. She didn't even care about him. He was a ticket, a connection, a chance. My son's eyes widened as he heard her words. I saw the moment he broke, the moment illusion met reality, the moment he realized he had chosen someone who saw him as a stepping stone, not a partner. Daniel stepped closer to me and quietly asked, "Do you want to offer them a deal?" His tone was steady, not aggressive, not emotional, just factual. He knew power didn't need shouting, and he knew the bride's family would accept anything if they thought they could still gain something. I looked straight at the bride. She stiffened. Her hands shook. She wanted to appear calm, but couldn't hide the fear carving lines across her perfectly painted face. I spoke softly. "If you want access, sign a contract." She immediately nodded. Yes, we can do that." But I cut her off. "Sign a contract promising you will never ask my son for money, never ask for access to the company, never touch any inheritance, and never approach Daniel or his firm again." Her jaw dropped. My son stared at me, shocked, not because of the contract, but because I was finally standing up for myself in a way he had never seen. The bride's father tried to negotiate. Perhaps a smaller agreement. Daniel raised one eyebrow. The father went silent immediately. He understood then that he had no leverage. The bride realized the truth too. She wasn't being offered a negotiation. She was being offered a chance to walk away with dignity. But greed, real greed, never accepts dignity when it smells opportunity. She whispered to my son, "Tell her no. Tell her we deserve more." That was it. That was the moment my son finally broke free from her illusions. He stepped back from her, looked at her with disgust, and said, "You didn't marry me. You tried to marry a company." The bride's face twisted, not in sadness, but in rage. "Fine," she snapped. "If this is what you want, then give me money to leave." She said it openly, in front of everyone. Gasps filled the room. She didn't ask for love. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't ask for understanding. She asked for cash. My son stepped away from her like she was a stranger. Daniel shook his head with quiet disappointment. And I finally saw exactly who she was. Without the dress, without the jewels, without the perfect smile. She didn't want my son. She wanted a lifestyle. And now that the truth was exposed, she would do anything to salvage a piece of it. But there was nothing left for her to take. After the bride demanded money in front of everyone, the room changed. The chatter died. The music felt out of place. The chandeliers above us sparkled the same, but everything beneath them was different. People who once looked at her with admiration now stared with disbelief. My son stepped away from her like he was finally seeing the truth for the first time. And as she stood there on her wedding day, begging for money instead of love, I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not triumph, just clarity. I finally understood why life had placed me in row 14, not for humiliation, but for revelation. Daniel placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, guiding me out of the spotlight. Not to hide me, no, to give me space. He knew I didn't need to see more. I had already seen everything I needed to see. The bride was no victim. She wasn't confused. She was simply exposed. My son stayed behind, trying to control the chaos. But it wasn't chaos caused by me. It was caused by a lie. A long-standing lie about love, respect, and intentions. A lie he had willingly ignored. Now, with the truth laid bare, he couldn't unsee any of it. Guests whispered as I walked past them, some with sympathy, some with admiration, some with shame because they knew they had laughed earlier when I sat alone in the back. But I didn't hold it against them. People follow what they see, and they saw the bride's behavior before they ever saw mine. I stepped outside into the cool evening air. For the first time that day, I could breathe, really breathe. I felt lighter, not because of what was exposed, but because I had finally spoken the truth I held inside for years. The truth of who I was, the truth of what I built, the truth of how I deserved to be treated. A few minutes later, Daniel joined me outside. He didn't lecture me, he didn't comfort me. He simply stood beside me the same way he did in row 14, quietly, respectfully, like an equal. He finally said, "You did well. You didn't let anger speak. You let the truth speak for you." I nodded. He was right. I didn't come to that wedding to hurt anyone. I came for my son. I came out of love. But life has a way of showing us people's hearts in the moments they think we are weakest. And that is when truth is sharpest. My son eventually came outside, tears in his eyes. He sat beside me on a bench, his head in his hands. "Mom," he whispered, "I failed you." I didn't interrupt. I let him speak. I let them treat you like you were nothing. I let her convince me you were a burden. I forgot who raised me. I forgot who taught me to stand tall. His voice cracked. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." I looked at him, my child whom I carried, fed, raised, supported through every hardship. And I remembered something an older friend once told me. Children will hurt us the deepest because we love them the most. But pain doesn't erase love, it only makes it more honest. I said quietly, "You didn't fail me. You forgot me. And now you remember." His tears didn't stop, but his shoulders relaxed. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I once knew, the boy who used to run into my arms, not away from them. He told me he ended the marriage that night, that he finally saw the truth, and that he didn't want a life built on greed. He apologized again, over and over, until I held his hands and told him it was over. We can't rewrite the past, but we can learn from it. Later, Daniel drove me home. My son followed in his car. When we reached my house, I stepped out and looked at the simple place that had held my entire life. It wasn't grand, it wasn't shiny, but it was mine. And now, for the first time, my son saw it through new eyes, not as something beneath him, but as something that built him. In the weeks that followed, my son visited me often, without his bride, without excuses, without guilt. We shared meals, stories, memories. We healed. He slowly rebuilt the bond he almost let die. He understood that respect is not about wealth or image. It is about how you treat the people who loved you before anyone else did. I didn't cut him out. Mothers rarely do. But I created boundaries. I reminded him gently that love is a choice, not a given, and he chose to be better. As for the bride and her family, they vanished. Once the truth about my shares and my influence surfaced, they realized my son wasn't the ladder they hoped for. They found someone else to climb. And me? I didn't change my life. I didn't buy diamonds or move into a mansion. I stayed in my simple home, surrounded by peace and honesty. But one thing changed forever. I no longer allowed anyone, family or stranger, to place me in the back row. Because here's the lesson I learned. People will put you where they believe you belong, but it's your job to decide if they're right. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up and walk out of row 14.